We just began yesterday or 2 days ago speaking about the concept of prophecy. Why prophecy is a fundamental, it's one of the 13 tenets of Jewish belief. And as the words of Rambam, who's the codifier, and it's interesting, he chose 13 tenets of Jewish faith. The number was created by Rambam, 13. It's referred to as Yud Gimel Ikri Amuna, the 13 fundamentals of Jewish belief. Because the numerical value of Echad is 13. That if you want to have a relationship with God, who's one, you must believe in these 13 tenets, which numerically is Echad, is one. That's why he chose number 13 to break it down into 13 segments, which each one is a fundamental, each one complements the other for the totality of what Jewish belief is. So one of the tenets is that God communicates with man, which is prophecy. So we discussed it the other day. We had mentioned there's a mission in Pirkei Avos that says that God created the world with 10 utterances. Why did God create the world with 10 utterances? He could have created the world with one utterance. God could have said, let it all be. Let it all be. It would, the same thing, would have had the same result as saying it in 10 utterances. Why did God choose 10 utterances? The first day, the second day, but in total it was 13, it's in 10. Why? To give reward to the tzaddikim, to the devoutly righteous, who uphold the world that was created with 10 utterances. And to punish the evil who destroyed the world that was created with 10 utterances. So the obvious question is to reward the righteous that we understand. Since God took a greater initiative to create existence, so the tzaddik should be a beneficiary of that. But to do more so the evil person should be more culpable, God's not looking for culpability. He's not looking for that. So what does it mean? And the evil person, so he expressed it through 10, so the evil person should be more culpable. It's totally contrary to the whole concept of understanding who God is. God only created the world that man should be the ultimate beneficiary, not that he should be victimized due to his own misbehavior. So how do we understand it? So we mentioned name in the Morale of Prague that what's the difference between 9 ones and 10 ones? 9 ones, each digit is a separate entity. If you count from 1 to 10, 10 is a unit. Although it's comprised of ones, but each one contributes to the totality of called the unit, which is called 10. Meaning like this, you look at this world, it borders on the infinite. Whatever it is, whether it's the human being, the unintelligent creature, vegetation, fish, water, gases, inanimate, whatever it is, reptiles. Try to figure it out. How did it all happen? You can't make heads or tails or rhyme or reason out of what's going on. Why? Because each part seemingly has no relevance to anything else. It's random components. What about if God created the world with 10 utterances? That all this came about with 10, which means it all comes together as one unit. That means each component, aspect of the creation complements another component of creation. Everything's complementary. If that's the case, if you look at the total picture, then you're able to see how one's interconnected with the other. Now, how does this happen? The answer is this was literally planned and detailed, and there's somebody behind this creation. Otherwise, you could say it's random. Disparate parts, one thing has nothing to do with another. But if it's 10, so now God doesn't know the person culpable. There's a concept known as Chinuch Nishma. Person was born and he believed he was a Gentile. And only later in life he finds out he was a Jew. He's not held accountable for the time he know that he wasn't Jewish. He's like a child who was taken captive by Gentiles, never knew his Jewish identity. There's no liability for that person. It's only once you know, and you should have known better. Now we talk about you in the context of choice. You made a choice. If you make a choice, now you're responsible for that choice. But if you're in a position you didn't even know there was a basis for choice, there's no accountability. That's the concept. If God were created the world, that it's impossible to come upon the truth of existence because there's no semblance of any sense, and it seems all random, even the evil person wouldn't be classified as evil. Because he's a victim of just the reality of existence. God created the 10, which 10 is a unit, and now by looking at the world, now you have a context of choice. Because since everything complements everything else, you should have seen and understood that there is a creator, there's a maker behind this. This is not random. Well, I think it is random. Okay, that's your choice. So you can see one of two ways. The moment it's your choice, now you carry responsibility for making the choice if it's the wrong choice. Because there's enough information there to support that there is a creator and there is accountability and your actions have value. So that's what it means. God created the world with 10 utterances because 10 is the unit which each one complements the other. So when you look at existence, you understand it's not random, but rather there's a plan and everything connects with everything else and it creates one big picture, which the picture is called perfection. That's what the world is all about. So it's all the way you perceive something. So Echad, we're talking about 13 tenets of Jewish belief. If you believe 8 or 9, you don't have all the components. If you have 13, from 1 through 13, and you believe in every one of them, now you're seeing through a lens that now you can believe in God. You can see how everything falls in, because otherwise you have questions. There's a God. What does God want from us? How does God communicate with us? How do we know what he wants? If God never communicated with the human being, how are we supposed to make heads or tails out of this existence? The answer is that God does communicate with people. You have to be a special person, but he does communicate. Once he communicates, that means he shared what the protocol is and what the purpose is and how to go about doing it. Well, I choose to say he never communicated. That's your choice. But it's already, now we're in the realm of choice. There's such thing as reward and punishment. There are consequences. How could it be reward or punishment if God doesn't know what our thoughts are or what our actions are? The answer is one of the tenses. God is aware of what your thoughts are and what your actions are. As a result of that, there is a record. Each person has his own record, and therefore it's evaluated. Did you succeed? Did you fail? So every one of these tenets is a piece of the puzzle. But if you have all 13, what's 13? That's echad. Now you have a lens that you can see God in existence. But if any of them are missing, any of these tenets are missing, these components, then the lens is not a clear lens. Years ago, I said a share at Danny Abraham's office. Danny Abraham, then it was called Thompson Medical. This is before it was Slim Fast. So the boardroom that I said the share there for 13 years, like at Shai's office for 13 years. And 13 is a good number. It's echad also, just make that clear. So for 13 years, so I used to say share, there was the boardroom right next to the president's office. It was called the fishbowl. It's called the fishbowl because it was a glass enclosure. And the president of then Thompson Medical, eventually Slim Fast, was Ed Steinberg, Dr. Ed Steinberg. Ed Steinberg originally was a doctorate in optometry. That's what he was. And being Danny's brother-in-law, when he started the company, he took him on as the president. So he was speaking, and he said to him, it says in Pirkei Avos, Al Shlosha Dorim Olam Omed. The world stands on 3 principles. Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Hasodin. Study of Torah, service of God, and acts of loving kindness. Those are the 3 principles the world stands upon. You know, if you have a table and only has 2 legs, it's not going to stand. You have to have minimally 3 legs, and they have to be placed correctly to hold up the table. The world stands on three principles: study of Torah, service of God, and acts of loving kindness. So what I said was, this is what I shared with him, that let's say a person is exemplary in Torah and exemplary in service of God, but when it comes to acts of loving kindness, he's totally deficient. You understand? He's off balance. The only way the Torah is exemplary is if you have the other pieces. Each one supports the other. If you're outstanding in Torah, you have to be outstanding in acts of loving kindness. If you have two, you don't have the third, you're off balance. It's only when you have all in place as they should be, now you have that equilibrium, it's balanced. This is what I shared with him. So he says, you know something, as an optometrist, he says, if a person has perfect vision in one eye and the other eye he can't see, he says that God created a person, you have eyes on two sides of your head. Distance and depth of perception is due because you have two eyes. If you have one eye, you wouldn't have a sense of distance, and you would not have a sense of depth of perception. You wouldn't have perception of depth. But because you have two, each one supports the other, and then you have a total picture, and therefore you have a sense of distance and you have a sense of depth of perception. That's what he shared with me then, which was exactly what I'm saying. God gave us gave us lenses. You have to see through three lenses: Torah, service of God, and doing acts of loving kindness, which is between man and man. If they're all functioning properly, each one complements the other, you see correctly. But otherwise, when we grew up, there were kids, there were children who had cross-eyed, if you remember. In the 50s, there were many kids who were cross-eyed. They needed special surgery, whether it was due to a lazy eye, whatever it was. They used to call the person cockeyed, if you remember. It's cockeyed. Person was cross-eyed. You understand? If you have Torah and Avodah, you're cockeyed. And you have to have all three. If you want to have the lenses that they should operate and see clearly, you have to have all three functioning simultaneously. To be able to see Echad, which is 13 in Merklis, is Echad 1, you have to have all 13 tenets of Jewish belief. If any one of them is missing, the lens is it's a distorted lens. When you have all 13, then you have an appreciated understanding why things are the way they should be, and they function, and you have a sense of value to be able to invest properly. Okay, here's the question again.
So, Rabbi, I'm interested in knowing if God puts equal weight on our actions and our thoughts, or are our actions given more shrift, more weight than our thoughts in the eyes of God?
Okay. Before I answer that question, I just want to give you a background a little bit. We speak about quality Judaism. Two people wear tefillin, two people wear tzitzis, two people eat matzah at the Seder. So the functioning action is identical. But the question is, what is the intent of the person when he eats that matzah at the Seder? Is he doing it because he enjoys the disc matzah? And he got it from the Lubavitch because they sent him $40 a pound matzah. He didn't have to pay for it. Is that why? And it's a tremendous center of discussion. Is that why? Well, when you eat that matzah, because it conforms with the laws of fulfilling the positive command, eating matzah, your intent is to fulfill the will of God to eat matzah at the Seder, the 15th night of Nisan. If you have in mind you're doing for a mitzvah, then that mundane physical act of chewing and swallowing takes on spiritual dimensions. If you're doing just enjoy, and that's where it begins, that's where it ends, it's a functioning act, doesn't generate any spiritual consequence. What about if I eat it because I'm doing it because I want to be acknowledged that I'm doing a mitzvah? That's not the right intent. So it's considered, it creates a deficient energy. What about I'm doing it for the sake of the mitzvah? Because God wants me to do it. I do it out of fear. I do it out of reverence. I do it out of love. The more you infuse that act, it elevates and advances it. It produces another dimension of spirituality. So if God wouldn't know your thoughts, how does God make an evaluation? What your intent was when you chewed that unleavened product and you swallowed it? To make the evaluation, to understand what you deserve, what you don't deserve. The answer is God knows our thoughts. First thing, he knows the action. He sees you doing it. But even he sees you doing it, that's only superficial. How does he know what's in your brain, what's in your mind, and your emotion? The love, the reverence, any of that. The answer is God's aware of your thoughts and your actions. As a result of that, qualitatively or lacking quality, he's in the place to make that evaluation, to be able to fully give you what you deserve. Or if a person, let's say, even when you violate the Torah, if a person does it out of defiance, he can eat kosher, but specifically, intentionally, I will not eat kosher. Defiance is the most extreme level of transgression. But a person says, look, if I could get kosher, the same quality as non-kosher, I eat kosher. So why is he eating non-kosher? He's not being defiant, because he's a priority over God. Because I enjoy the better things in life. I prefer to eat this rather than that. If you can find me kosher crabs, I'd eat kosher crabs. But there isn't kosher crabs. So it's not you doing to be defiant against God. It's a violation, but it doesn't have the extreme consequence as you doing it out of defiance. But how do you know what the person's intent is? If the level of liability is determined by intent, and God does know your intent, so how does he deliver punishment? The answer is he's aware of your intent. This is how the intent plays positive and negative on both sides of the equation. Okay? Now there's another concept. Let's say a person is a habitual transgressor. Habitual. Meaning this man steals continuously. He's a thief, dishonest. So of course, the person's dishonest, he never steals. You may want to be dishonest, but it always works out. You can never actually actualize your level of dishonesty. You can't say he's a criminal. He never did a criminal act. What about he crossed that lines many times? He crossed the line of criminality. And now he wants to cross it again, and something interferes and doesn't allow him to do it. But if that interference wouldn't have happened, he would have done it. He's held accountable as if he did do it. Why? Because he would have done it. The only reason why he didn't do it is only because it just didn't work out. But what would have he done? The person is held culpable as if he transgressed, as if he committed the crime. So I'll tell you something very interesting. There's Rabbeinu Yonah, who's a commentator on Pirkei Avos and the Talmud, and he has a Mussar work called Shari Tshuva, Gates of Penitence. He cites an Avos Reb Nosson, which was written by a member of the Mishnaic period, writes that and it's based on a midrash. The person lives 80 years and he's devout. And he lives all the years fully invested. So he deserves tremendous reward. Another person is just as devout and God takes him after 40 years. So the person who lived 40 years is half the life of the idiot person who comes to God and says, it's not equitable. If I would have lived those additional 40 years, I would have been devout for 80 years. Is it my fault that you only allowed me to live 40 years? Why am I shortchanged? God says you get full credit as if you lived 80 years. Although you're only in operation for 40 years. Because God knows factually, you've proven yourself that the way you met your challenges, you always met the challenges appropriately. Therefore, you're credited even for the years that you didn't live within the age span of a human being. That's the way it works. So a person wants to do a mitzvah, and he's not able to actualize the mitzvah. Because a poor man, he gets a call, he wants to give money to a poor man, all of a sudden the poor man disappears. And you already put your hand in the pocket. You get credit as if you gave charity to that poor man. Because the only reason why you didn't give the charity is because the poor man walked away, disappeared. But you're fully credited as if you gave that charity. That's how intent plays a role, although in actuality, the action was never actually actualized. So, but God has to know, aware of your action and is aware of your thought process. Otherwise, the evaluation can't be appropriate to be able to give you reward and punishment. And if the objective of life is, do you meet the challenge? Didn't you meet the challenge, which is reward and punishment? So if God doesn't know your thoughts, how does the system work? It's a non-operable system. The answer is because God does know. God knows your thoughts. He knows your actions. As a result of that, the evaluation is always accurate to the nth degree, and you get exactly what you deserve or what you don't deserve. You don't receive. Say the third paragraph of the Shema, which is the paragraph of Tzitzis. It says, Lo sasur achrei levavcha achrei einechem. You're not permitted to veer after your hearts, after your eyes. And then it says, Asher atem zonim achreim. So it says, the person has heretical thoughts in his mind. Heretical thoughts. It's a Torah violation. There's certain things, even though you don't take action because of it, but a Jew has an obligation to believe. Belief is not an action. It's just a state of being. Do you believe? Don't you believe? The person says, I don't believe. But outwardly, you wouldn't know it. Only he knows that he doesn't believe. That's a Torah failing. That's a violation. Because there, the mitzvah is not to be actualized. It's just, do you or don't you? There's a mitzvah to love God. Do you love God? Don't you love God? Of course, it manifests itself of how you're going to behave. Person who acts as a result of love, he's motivated to a greater degree than a person doesn't love. But it's in the heart. Do you love? Do you believe? Don't you believe? All these various things. Do you believe that God took us out of Egypt? It's a positive commandment to believe that God took us out of Egypt. Remember the Shabbos and keep it holy. There you have to verbalize it. That's what we say, Kiddush over the cup, wine, Friday night. That's a positive commandment. There you have to verbalize it. You have to verbalize your belief, the intent that God is the creator of this world. Every Friday night. That's what you have to do. But there's certain things that a Jew is not permitted to have lewd thoughts. Lewd thoughts, which is purely for the sake of lewdness. A person reads pornographic material, and because of that, you have certain thoughts. Those thoughts are a Torah violation. You're soiling. The Rav Chaim Voloshin cites a Zohar. Zohar is the basis for all Kabbalistic concepts. It's part of the oral law that where is the soul of a Jew, of any human being? The soul rests above the brain. That's where it is. The soul is an entity of holiness. Whenever you take an inappropriate thought, like a lewd thought, into your brain, he says it's the equivalent of Titus when he took the prostitute and he's opened a Torah in the Holy of Holies and he actually penetrated into there. It's that level of desecration. The soul is the Shekhinah, is God's presence. So by allowing that inappropriate thought to go into that location, which is the ultimate level of holiness, is like taking a prostitute and engaging with her in the Holy of Holies. That's the Zohar. You understand? You didn't do an action. You didn't even verbalize it. But you thought something which is inappropriate. As a result of that, because you've soiled the location. You've desecrated the location. Because that thought is totally inappropriate to enter into there. I'll give you an example. You take something, when they manufacture pharmaceuticals, the level of purity has to be certain standards. So we consider hygienically pure in a laboratory where they produce certain types of pharmaceuticals. It's not enough. It doesn't meet the grade. You have to meet that grade, whatever that grade of purity is for pharmaceuticals. And if you bring it into a location doesn't, they become tainted, they become contaminated. And it can have very serious consequences because of the makeup, the chemical makeup of those pharmaceuticals. Bringing anything into that brain, which is inappropriate, you're tarnishing, you're soiling the purity of the brain, because that's the holiness. God's presence is in your brain, because that's the soul. Therefore, it's unacceptable. You're desecrating the location. That's the concept. Go ahead.
Follow up, Rabbi, if I may, quickly, because this happened just yesterday, and I'm going to admit some level of embarrassment here, but this is a specific question. So I actually said to Anne the other day, do you remember, and forgive me if anybody's incensed here, do you remember the delicious taste of an eel roll, a sushi eel roll? Eel is clearly not kosher. My question is, and by the way, from that question to Anne, I actually, I'm saying it now, I'm embarrassed. I salivated that flavor. Is this because in my mind, you don't know it, but I know it. So my question is, and I didn't order one, and I'm not ordering one. So am I getting credit for reflecting on something I did wrong and knowing I did better? Or am I in trouble for thinking about the taste of an eel roll? And I mean it. I'm not.
No. You're not in trouble to think about it. No. If you think about it and you stay away from it and you suppress the desire for having it, you get credit for that. The more you have a desire, and despite the desire, you suppress it, you're credited as if you fulfilled a commandment, a mitzvah. You know what the mitzvah is? A Jew has an obligation to fear God. So why do you refrain from eating eel or anything? I have a desire and I have a tug of war within me. So why do I suppress that desire? You know why? Because I fear God. So every time you suppress a desire for the sake of God, you're fulfilling the positive commandment of fearing God. The person will never eat eel, never eat anything of this. He never desires it. There's no suppression. You suppress nothing. You're doing the right thing by keeping kosher, not eating non-kosher. But the person who engages in that or is tempted, and despite the temptation, he suppresses it, he's accredited as a did a mitzvah because that's an expression of fear of God.
And Rabbi, I don't see that particular thought for me, and respectfully use the phrase, it's not lewd, it's not heretical. Maybe it is.
No. There's nothing wrong with thinking about it. Nothing. But let's say a person normally goes to tell you a story. There's a person many years ago. He himself was a computer genius, and he worked for Rothschild Bank. He used to travel around the world. He used to stay in a hotel. It could have been $10,000 a room a night. Suite. He had a Rolls Royce chauffeur driving around because he was representing Rothschild. He did tremendous deals all over the world. And he became a Baal Tshuva. And he gave that up. And he used to eat in a certain restaurant in New York. It was a game restaurant. They used to sell game, certain species of animals that he had to hunt. They didn't sell that kind of species at regular restaurants. And this person was a bulky person. He loved to eat. That's one of his vulnerability. He loved to eat. And whenever he would think about the game food he used to eat, he used to salivate. And he was one of the trustees of Fifth Avenue Synagogue. Okay. And he's walking by that game restaurant. He's already observant. And he's keeping kosher. And as he's walking by, he can't resist the temptation. And he decides this one time, I'm going into the game restaurant. Satisfy my desire. The moment he's about to go in, all of a sudden, another board member of Fifth Avenue comes by and he sees him. The moment he's near, all of a sudden he loses all desire, keeps going. Okay? Why did he not go into the game restaurant? Because he wanted to eat not kosher. Because if word would have gotten out that he ate this game food, it would have reflected well on it. It would have been an embarrassment for him. So he did not do the wrong thing for a good reason, because he didn't want to be embarrassed. But otherwise he would have gone there and he would have eaten it. So God foiled it that he shouldn't cross that line. But if he would have. But he already was in the position, he didn't break the laws of dietary laws for a while. So there, he's not held accountable. Because God worked it out that he didn't go. But let's say he did go, and he was always failed at temptation. So why did he go this one time? Only because he didn't want to be embarrassed. Otherwise, he would have gone. He's held accountable as if he went. Yes. That, Larry.
But yeah, I'm sorry, Rabbi, I was on mute. But Rabbi, now forgive me again, but it seems to me he did the right thing, but for the wrong reason. He's supposed to do it because he recognizes God doesn't want him to do it.
Right,
He did it
correct,
from
correct. That's what I'm telling you.
embarrassment.
He would have gone in if not for this concern about embarrassment. He would have gone in.
So credit for the right thing, but the thought behind it was wrong.
No. If a person doesn't commit murder because he doesn't want to prison for the rest of his life, right? You're not committing murder for the wrong reason. Because you should appreciate what another person's life is. That's what you shouldn't commit murder. Not because you can go to prison for 25 years to life. That's not the reason. But thank God, because there's that guillotine hanging over your head. That's why you're not crossing that line. So you're not committing murder for the wrong reason. But factually, you're behaving yourself, which is very positive. So let's say a person doesn't sin because he doesn't want to go to spiritual hell. Even though that's not the reason why you should behave yourself, but factually, Nachmanides writes, you get credit for fear of God. Person wouldn't have fear of God, he wouldn't be concerned about spiritual hell, what we call Gehenna. Wouldn't be concerned. I'm only concerned about Gehenna because God, I know God is the ultimate, and he could reign in on you. And there's going to be an account that you have to reckon with that account. So there is a silver lining in that black cloud. It was an expression of his fear of God because he's afraid of being punished. But if God can't punish him, what is he afraid of? So the refrain there is an expression of the fear of God.
Thanks, Rabbi.